Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. I am here today with Daraka Larimore-Hall, one of my longtime buddies, professional colleague, source, but we've been through a lot over the years. We've argued a lot, or we might argue today.
For sure.
He was supportive of me back in the old news press days when they had all those ethical issues and all those resignations. So, and we both grew up here in Santa Barbara, Goleta. We're local guys who stayed here. So I always enjoy talking to you, Daraka. How you doing today?
Good. Happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Good. Well, that, I think you're just, totally like progressive and smart and great speaker, and you understand all the political stuff really well. And so I want to just dive right in there. We're in the middle of a mayor's race, city council race. It's Santa Barbara. It's where we're from. It's what we care about. Let me talk to you. You're the former chair of the Santa Barbara County Democratic Party. You've had a whole number of high profile positions with the state party. You are somebody who's a big thinker about these things. What's your take on the mayor's race? Cathy Murillo, right? Democratic Party, endorsed by them now, back to back, running for a second term. And is she facing a challenge? I mean, you were concerned Randy Rouse is going to take this. Where are you at with all this?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm concerned. I think anybody following a race like this has to be concerned because it's an off-cycle race. Think the good folks in Sacramento, it will be our last off-cycle race because they will become illegal, as they should have been long ago. So turnout is going to favor more conservative candidates traditionally, and especially since we just had a recall election. There's lots of reasons to worry about conservative candidates overperforming in a city council race. So yeah, definitely concerned. I've been out knocking on doors for Cathy and for the other endorsed Democrats, and trying to pay attention to the scuttlebutt, so to speak. But I mean, my general take is that I think Cathy's been doing a good job on the things that actually matter to real people in Santa Barbara. I think there's a really strange, and I'm interested to hear your take as a journalist, because I'm sure you're talking to people, but there's this weird, vague, I don't know, ennui about Cathy and the world that I've heard, both out on doors and from, kind of self-appointed opinion makers in town that are just, it's just like, COVID has been rough, and the debris flow and the tragedy that we had in Montecito and so forth. And Cathy just hasn't fixed it all miraculously or something. And I just feel weird uneasiness. And so let me take that out in the mayor's position, which is really just one vote without any kind of real executive power. So there's this like vague, I don't know, just like goalpost moving weird expectations around Cathy as an individual and in her tenure as mayor, that I think some, other Democrats locally got whiff of. And so we're like, hey, why not me? I should run too. Totally irresponsibly. And nobody has any real political, I mean, can I just say that endorsement of James Joyce in the Santa Barbara Independent and the editorial that came with it was just like a masterwork of vapid prose and just like saying nothing. I mean, but I think it like put in a nutshell where Cathy's at in the race, which is people are like, hey, she's really progressive and she's stood up for people who normally are ignored in this city, and she's done a good job and things have gotten done. But I just feel like the mayor should make me feel good in some way, and she doesn't, or something. So we should have a mayor that makes us feel good. So dump her and vote for somebody else. I mean, that was it in a nutshell. It's a weird race. It's not about, it's not about policy. It's this weird kind of vague personality stuff.
Do you feel as though every time somebody says I'm going to vote for James Joyce, that means Randy's chances of winning this thing grow greater?
Well, if you think that there's a block of, conservative voters in Santa Barbara who don't like Cathy's pro-environment, pro-social justice, pro-worker policies, that want a more conservative mayor. And then there's people who don't want that. The people who don't want a conservative mayor is the majority. And James Joyce and Deborah Schwartz are both trying to get some of that non-conservative vote as well. So it can't help but hurt Cathy in what should be just a straight conservative versus progressive election that gives, the actual people of Santa Barbara a chance to decide what kind of direction they want. All this, like, let's turn this all about personalities and vague bullshit that isn't about policy, is all really disempowering to voters ultimately. Because then they're choosing between these like styles or sort of vague things they read about or hear third hand. And that's good for moving us backwards.
Do you have any criticisms of Cathy Murillo as a mayor over the last 4 years?
Do I have criticism? I mean, sure. I think, the one that comes to mind and like everybody talks about, I have as a criticism, but it's not a particularly harsh criticism because I don't, it was just a kind of shit show in a difficult situation, but she definitely could have handled the events around Black Lives Matter protests in Santa Barbara better. Because that's another thing you hear around, again, never about the policy, not about the groundbreaking work that she and the rest of the council have done on police accountability, but again, some kind of vague, she didn't make people feel the way they wanted the mayor to make them feel about that issue. And that was true of police critical Black Lives Matter protesters, as well as other folks kind of just consuming the news passively out in the community. So she could have handled that better. I think honestly sometimes Cathy goes too far in worrying about what gadflies with no real base or coherent political opinion like Jerry Roberts thinks. And I think she could be a little sort of just like stronger on her own feet. But I judged the mayor and the city council based on the votes and the policy, and overall this has been a strong council, a good council, with governing in incredibly horrible times and dealing with some difficult issues. But look at what we've gotten. We've gotten some real progress on police reform. We're part of the way out of the gates where we need to be in terms of tenants' rights. We've got a community choice energy scheme up that we're part of, that the city's part of. City passed a historic project labor agreement to keep construction jobs local and highly skilled, which is incredibly important for fighting the race to the bottom and the impoverization of the workforce in the state. So, it's just like good stuff, deliverable things for the community. And I think that's what's the most important. So, when it comes to votes, the things that I think matter the most, I don't have much of a criticism. I think she's been good.
There's this, people criticize Cathy for a lot of reasons. As a reporter, I have some observations. It's very insider
what do you hear?
But the biggest thing that I hear is, she doesn't want to reach out to the people who don't disagree with her, who don't agree with her. So she doesn't reach out to the conservatives, the property owners, the business owners. She's not doing enough to sort of build consensus, right? That she's only a leader for people who agree with her. But as mayor, she's not trying to bring in these other moderates and conservatives to the table. That's a criticism you hear. She's not a consensus builder. And then there are some...
Which mayor did that?
Right.
Which mayor we had was a policy leader even. Mm-hmm. It's just like an insane, weird new set of abstract criteria that they're putting on the mayor.
You could say Helene Schneider, at least for the first term before everything fell apart, she slid back and forth. Like she could hang with the progressives and then she could kind of hang with the sort of the moderates to the rights. Would you say that in your recollection or not really?
I don't know what that even means. Hang with.
Yeah.
Like they can't hang together with the Brown Act. Like they can't even do what we think of as like a normal partisan governance project because of, the fact that they can't have meetings about city policy in groups that could form a majority. So what I saw was Mayor Schneider would pander to voters of different groups, if that's what you mean. And Cathy doesn't pander. She just is like, here's my platform.
Yeah.
And here's what I stand for. So I don't, if someone could give me, and I haven't heard one, like, here was a policy that the city was working on, and she only listened to her base, which I guess is what, like working families, renters. I don't know. I mean, the Independent was like, she only talks to her base. I'm not sure what that means, but so who were the people that were left out of what policy discussion?
Well, I guess the PLA, okay, the Project Labor Agreement, if you're against the PLA, those people probably feel as though Cathy had her mind made up from the beginning, and they said that at the public.
Well, hopefully she did.
Yeah.
Because the way that this democracy is supposed to work is that people are like, I stand for X, Y, and Z, and then we vote for them or not.
Yeah.
Not we vote for someone who's going to have no opinions on things, who we don't know where they're going to stand, and then they're just going to go and talk to everyone and come down on things. I mean, like that model of city governance, or that mythology of city government, is like how Randy Rouse talks about politics. It's how, unfortunately, very sadly, James Joyce has started to talk about politics. And it's number one, a very undemocratic way of thinking things, because it totally disempowers voters. It's just like, vote for the guy that you like the cut of his jib, and just he'll make the good decisions. And secondly, it's incredibly naive about how power works in this city. So, yeah, it's true that like employers, landlords, and wealthy folks in this community, if there isn't an organized movement of working class people in the labor movement, or renters now with the tenants union, if that doesn't exist, the status quo, the just sort of default, is for all of those folks to be running the show and running city hall and running city politics, because they have the power in the economy. They have the power to fund campaigns. I mean, it's the real estate industry that's funding Nina's campaign, for example. So like, when it's hard for me to muster the sympathy of like, well, Cathy Murillo, a progressive Democrat who's always stood by labor and the rights of people to organize, who's always thought that unionized labor is good for the community, who's all of those things, like that, she didn't pretend that she didn't have those opinions in meetings with contractors so that they felt good. I mean, it just doesn't hold up.
Well, can we talk a little bit about race and gender?
Sure.
So how much of the Cathy criticism is she's a woman and she's a Mexican American woman? Do you think that that's fueling some of the animosity toward her at all?
Yes. And yes, I do. And let me first say that it's totally possible that it fuels it in ways that I'm not even aware of. Especially on the gender tip. I'm a man, and I'm sure that there's sexist stuff that goes on in the world that I miss. But the ways that it occurs to me, it seems really obvious to me, is one, this weird double standard of like, I don't, these incoherent criticisms that she didn't, I don't know, fix COVID or something, feels like something that's very gendered in particular, of just like, and then I also think that for the business interests in town and for some voters, that they're just like, I'm going to close my eyes right now and think about what a strong leader mayor looks like. And then they do that. And that's not Cathy. It's not Latina, who speaks plainly, clearly like comes from a working class background, all of these things, little hippie-ish, like none of the things about Cathy are what are the cookie cutter politician. So I think that is a way that she is fighting against sexist and racist expectations of what a politician is. I don't think that the way that racism functions in Santa Barbara politics is, the kind of blatant, outright racism or spoken animosity towards Latinos that you might see in other parts of the state. It's far more polite and far more subtle. But it's very much there. And so, yes, I think Cathy's had double standards to live up to as a woman and a Latina, and then there's all kinds of extra stuff that I'm probably not super qualified to talk about, but that I think you and I have talked about and observed about Santa Barbara, right? Which is that there's, infighting and competition and tensions within the Mexican American community, within the Latino community, which isn't just Mexican Americans. Yeah. So there are folks that if they disagree with her about one thing or another are like, well, she's not, Latinx enough. She's not Chicana enough. She's not Mexican enough. That's just like not a thing that the white candidates have to think about or worry about.
Yeah, that's right. She's doesn't speak Spanish like fluently, so she'll get judged by that group,
Right.
that she's not authentic there. But then, you can have somebody call her in the middle of the street that she's white passing, and like that's not something. No one's like, Randy, you're white passing. Like no one would ever say that, like it's not. So there are certain things that people, Latinos, Latinas, Mexican Americans, they feel judged by that not everybody else gets. So then the next step is like, oh, Josh and Daraka are talking about, oh, there's racism as it relates to Cathy, but we like James Joyce, he's an African-American guy. So we're not racist because, we like him. Can you talk a little bit about James Joyce's candidacy and what is it about him that some people are sort of saying like, that's the mayor of Santa Barbara? And does race play at all into his candidacy at all?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, race is it's a thing that influences how we think about the world and each other, and it's always present. So it's not. I don't think it goes away with good intentions. But here's the thing: is that if there was a larger Black community in the city and someone from that community ran for mayor and was critical of white power in the city, had a politics that was like, hey, there's a problem with distribution of power or resources, and I'm going to be a voice of the Black community to, help address that inequality, or et cetera. I mean, they wouldn't have gotten the independence endorsement.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's not on James at all or his fault or anything. That white liberal racism is as patronizingly complex as it is, but again, just read that. You read that that editorial. It was like an artifact from that movie Get Out. It was just so like,
that's a good movie.
Like, oh, this woman is feisty and she gets things done, but she's real combative, but this other guy, he's so articulate and clean and he's got charisma and blah blah. So let's have that. And that sucks. I mean, it sucks for James, it sucks for Cathy, it sucks for everybody, but it's very common in California politics to pit, to have this is like, let's pit candidates or people of color against one another to get white votes, and then that game becomes, how do we convince those white voters who's the least threatening? And yeah, I mean the Independent article just like really spoke to that in my eyes.
How do you make the argument that James is not the perfect choice in a year after Black Lives Matter and the racial reckoning? Because you hear that, right? You hear from these people like, oh, well, now is the time for someone like James. He started,
it wasn't the time, but it wasn't the time for Babatunde. Why? Because Black people weren't being murdered by cops. Just because people now recognize that.
I love
that's
Babatunde.
Just like a really weird argument.
Yeah, no, but there's this feeling of like, Well, even before all this, he had this thing where we're going to do, conversations. We're going to talk about these issues. So he's ahead of his time, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, like, what would you say to somebody who says James Joyce is African American, a year after the George Floyd murder, he's the person that should be mayor of Santa Barbara and is going to vote on that alone?
I mean, I would like, what is James Joyce's policies regarding police accountability? Like, what's his record on is it really just his skin color? It's like his experience as a black person that we want in that position that will what? And how is that going to translate into the policy? And so then the question is, why take out somebody who has skin in the game, has fought for police accountability, got totally railed on by the cop lobby when she ran for assembly? Like, why not leave her there and add James to the city council if that's a good voice to add? It's, to me, it says everything that it's about. Let me take out a reliable progressive champion so that I can be mayor. And so I have the same feeling about James Joyce's candidacy as I do about Deborah Schwartz's, or Boat Rat Matt, or any of these people, which is just like I heard there's chum in the water that people don't, or like, meh about Cathy, so why not me? And I think that's an irresponsible way to think about politics. I think if what you're really concerned about is more people of color on the city council, or putting black people on the city council, that's a great thing to do, but don't suddenly discover that now when it's time to take out the progressive Latina. It's not like, I mean, it's just, it becomes an absurd oppression Olympics nonsense. Like, because there's been too many Mexican Americans on the Santa Barbara City Council, or so now we've got to replace that one with a black person. I mean, I'm a black person, and I find that logic offensive as also a Santa Barbaran who, looks out my window and sees the racial lines of inequality in this city, or it, hurts brown people, hurts Latino people, and I'm against that. So why the hell would I go and try to take out a champion of that? Like, yeah, that doesn't help black people. It's not going to keep one black person from being, murdered by a cop.
Can Cathy win? Can she win? Because if we look at the reverse, right? So a few years ago, 4 years ago, Angel Martinez, Frank Hotchkiss, Hal was a Democrat, but very much a moderate, and Cathy won. Could we see the reverse this time?
Yeah, sure.
We see, and
yeah,
I guess the question is, I know you don't do predictions, but
right.
What's Cathy's path here?
I mean, Cathy's path is just to, hold on to her base in a very split race. I mean, yes, I hate doing this, like the handicapping and so forth, because we just don't know. But again, there's X number of voters in the electorate who want to get rid of Cathy because she's too progressive. And those voters are being courted heavily by multiple candidates. Yeah. It's a progressive city. It's a democratic city. It's a city that actually does believe that police should be held accountable. It's a city that wants to make real progress on climate change. And so it's really, all these other candidates are either hoping their path. I think the default there, or the momentum is with Cathy for re-election. The path that each of these other people is trying to create is one of either, right-wing reaction, like on Randy's side, or let me be the person of the moment for completely rhetorical reasons without saying where I stand on any issues. Mm-hmm. Like James, which not like another a very successful recent national level black politician.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about the other races, okay? Particularly Megan Harmon and Nina Johnson. So Megan Harmon was appointed first time she's on a ballot, and you know, as a journalist, I mean, I've been accused, criticized. Oh, you got a thing for her because you quote her all the time. Same thing as Doss Williams, right?
Right.
When I was covering Doss, everybody used to blast me because Doss would get quoted, you know, in every story on everything. Megan Harmon gets quoted often because she says things. It's like she actually has points.
Funny thing about that.
She makes statements. And as a journalist, you're just going to quote the people who are specific and concise and can make a point. So you know, she's almost though sort of there's this buzz around her, like, oh, you know, she's too ambitious. What's she gonna do? She's gonna go somewhere else. Oh, she's just playing the game so that she can get these endorsements. And really, she just got here from Lompoc 3 years ago. You know, there's that whole thing.
You're friends with a lot of dumb assholes, it seems like. Who are these people?
Well, the thing about being a journalist is people tell you things, you know.
Friends with everybody.
So what is your assessment of like sort of the Megan Harmon sort of you know, whirlwind here in the last couple of years?
I don't know. That's funny because I mean, talk about a thing where sexism is playing a role. I mean, Christ, you know, heaven forbid somebody be in politics with some ambition and, you know, thinking about things.
Right.
To me, she's been just this incredible, you know, stroke of luck. Because these appointments, man, I mean, that's how we got, it was the appointment system that gave us Randy Rouse to begin with. And that guy's like a chucklehead. And so here we have this like policy specific, policy focused, inspiring, thoughtful, anti-racist, feminist, you know, pro-transit, pro-housing, progressive, that just like, popped on the scene and got appointed and has done really well. And not just that, but like helped elect other progressives to get a good majority on the council, you know, helping elect Democrats up and down the ticket and other cycles. I mean, I just couldn't be happier with somebody. I think Nina Johnston is really nice. I've known her for a really long time. And I don't mean that as like some kind of dismissal, like, oh, you know, she's nice. Like, she's smart. She's worked for the city. There's no reason that she should be running against Megan Harmon. Like, that's the thing, is like people are like, just, they have this, I don't know, high school city council or student council attitude about politics that's actually quite serious and impactful on people's lives. And so tell me the argument, and this is what I say to Nina, and also my friend, I haven't run into it, but my friend Zach Pike from way back is also running in that.
Oh, you know race. Zach?
Uh-huh. Yeah, from high school. So he's a great guy. I don't know why he's running, but this is the question, is like, why, or to James Joyce, to any of them, why should Megan Harmon not be on the council? Why should Cathy not be on the council? Why should we lose those people's votes for you? That's the thing that they have to convince me of. And oh my God, are they not convincing me of that? And so you have with Nina, like, I think a person who like wants to be in city council to help make the city better and nicer and so forth, but then is like, hey, I'm not going to talk to any of the endorsing organizations. I'm not going to work with any of the community groups. I'm just going to run. And then, you know, 40% of my money comes directly from the real estate industry, and I botch my filings tremendously and have to pay fines. And then I'm like, oh, but it's because I'm not backed by the Democratic Party. I mean, he's just like, give me a break. Mm-hmm. You could have started a year earlier and talking to people and you know, getting engaged with the organizations in the community that are moving, they're doing advocacy. And that to me, so this is the bottom line to me about someone like James and Deborah, who definitely know better because they've been around for a really long time and been through these processes. Deborah was very, very happy to be endorsed by the Democratic Party and labor groups and so forth when she ran for city council.
Yeah. Now
all of a sudden she's like the independent voice of independent independence, which is just absurd. So, but here's the thing, is that there are people in this community who wake up every day and either as volunteers or, you know, working for a nonprofit or an advocacy organization are like out there engaged on the issues, paying attention to how the council votes, paying attention to the policy discussions, paying attention to the relationship between the city, county, and state in terms of policy and politics. And it's not like I'm saying, oh, we should just hand over politics to that echelon of insiders or whatever you want to call them. But the fact is that those groups contain are engage regular folks of all walks of life, not whoever the independent was talking about. And those groups are doing the work, 365, like all the time, not just around election time. And so when a candidate is like, I'm going to run for office and I'm not going to go through any of the processes of any of those organizations, or I'm going to cherry pick the ones where I have friends on the board, I think that's disgusting. I mean, I think that's like a real slap in the face of the people that then they always would come around and ask for money and talk about how much they love the grassroots and the organization and so forth. But if you don't have the humility to be like, I'm not going to stand for office unless I have the support of these community organizations, I don't think you belong in politics. You belong in show business.
Yeah. And it is interesting that the same people who seek the endorsement of the Democratic Party are also the ones who then, when they don't get it, say, I'm this voice of compromise and independence.
I had $1, man. I had $1. But and
we're seeing that with all these candidates who try to get it for mayor, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, or didn't. I mean, Cathy got got an endorsement pretty early, where there's a lot of them didn't bother because they knew from talking to members of the board or whatever, or just common sense. Like, let's see, there's a Democratic incumbent mayor who like votes with the platform of the party and stands up for those issues, particularly ones that, nobody gave a flying fuck about 20 years ago in this community, issues that impact working families and the poor, and like, marginalized young people, all these groups and issues that Cathy's really, sunk her teeth into on the council. Like, to then turn around and be like, it's not legitimate for the organizations that work on those issues to engage in politics. The legitimate thing is just for me to take money from businesses and run on my, personality. What an impoverished view of democracy that is. It's very sad.
Do you have any thoughts on what's happening with the District 4 race? It's very clear there. And if you're a member of the Democratic Party, Sneddon is endorsed by them.
Mm-hmm.
Barrett Reed has a lot of developer money. What do you think of that contest and how that's shaping up?
I mean, I walked precincts for Kristen, knocked on doors, and did what I could as a volunteer. I definitely wish her luck. It's as you say, it's just like a real clear, obvious election between a Democrat who's not in any way always reliable on the issues and just like a Republican dude. And it's a good example why, people love to talk shit about the Democratic Party and, oh, the parties are bad and, independence, blah, blah, blah. But, the thing that I really appreciate about the local party, and this isn't true all around the state, is how based on policy and principles and pragmatism it is in its endorsements. Like, if you look at the endorsement logic of groups or people that somehow are seen as legitimate to weigh in politics, you have newspapers that are literally a for-profit business that the owner sits down with some of their employees and like writes a thing about politics, and we're like, oh well, the editor said, I mean, do we learn nothing from the news press that like newspapers are not democratic institutions? So I don't it's just like the indie endorsements are, I mean, they endorse Schwarzenegger. They've been against every healthcare reform that would require them to pay healthcare insurance for their own employees. I mean, it's a fucking business and it behaves like a business. So And then you have individual elected officials who are like, I'm endorsing my friend and blah, blah. And like literally you talk to them, and even ones I really like and support them and so forth. And you talk them through their logic or how they're making decisions on who to support. And it's like, well, our kids play Little League together, or we go to the same church, this, that. I mean, I think I ranted on this last time I was on here. Point being that the Democratic Party locally has endorsed people who ran against our candidates, who, you know, haven't been always there on the issues. But if based on the field and the election, they are the best candidate for our values and the best candidate for the issues in our platform, we'll support them. So we supported Laura Capps, even though she wasted everybody's time and money running against Doss Williams for supervisor. And we endorsed Kristen Sneddon for re-election because she's much, much better than her opponent, and is with us and with the platform and with working families, you know, a lot of the time.
I don't want to beat up on Kristen too much, but in my observation of her, she has a tendency to go back and forth on some issues. The PLA was an example. She had supported it, and then when it came down to the consent calendar, she voted against it. She had this logic of, oh, I don't want.
That seems to be, but that's like what people want more of for some reason. They're like, that's cool. I like it when politicians like say one thing when they're running, and then they sit down with some people and they flip and they change. I mean, that's horrible. It's exactly right. It's awful.
Yeah.
People should know that when they're they should have a fairly good sense of where the politicians are going to be in votes based on when they run. And so that's why, you know, James Joyce running on hopey changey innovation is just, how the hell do we know how that person's going to vote on a PLA?
It bother you that Kristen votes at the last minute and then she loses the endorsement of Labor? I mean, I guess your answer is, well, she's still better than Barrett Reed, right? So
yeah, but yes, it does bother me. But that's the point, is like, politics isn't about getting the perfect people you love or that you like or that are perfect, you know, always gonna, you know, do the right thing. It's about doing the best that you can in the circumstances. And I think, but here's the thing, is I think that there's something about when, if you look at the elected officials who either as activists or, you know, community advocates in their life or professionally or whatever it is, came up in the grassroots organizations or in contact with the grassroots organizations, get a different kind of education about what politics is than someone who frankly had the experience that Kristen Sneddon did, which was like, come in late after everybody's endorsed, get the personal endorsements of like some elected officials, and particularly like a group of community folks who were mad at the Democratic Party, beat the Democratic Party, and then be independent and I'm my own person. And now guess what? Look, now there's a Republican coming for you. Now you need the party. But this is you know, this is why we were here in the first place. But what it means is that then, yes, you get this sort of methodology of, instead of being like, okay, they're late, instead of having the understanding that the labor movement in general has a broad agenda and it's a good agenda and it's worked in other places, you have this attitude like, I have to think about everything, you know, based on the political impact on me, very narrowly, issue by issue. And again, it's like we valorize that kind of behavior and act like it's a sign of like political intelligence or acumen, and it's really the opposite. It's totally the opposite.
Let me push back on a couple of things, or, you know,
yeah,
I'm not going to say devil's advocate, because these are things that I have talked about on Jerry Roberts' show about Cathy. So I want to get your response. Is when you hear her in these forums, when you hear her in these debates, she sticks to her talking points. She talks about all the good things that the city has done, the votes that the city has taken, her actions. For example, she takes credit for the formation of the Civilian Formation Commission. Mm-hmm. She implies to somebody who's just watching that this is some idea of hers. This happened under her watch, when we know that that was pushed by some people in the community. And of course, she got behind it and said, this is a good idea. Okay. She doesn't really talk about sort of things that go wrong. She doesn't talk about litigation at City Hall. She doesn't talk about the turnover at City Hall. She doesn't acknowledge that there's been a lot of drama at City Hall, and it's more than drama. It's, you've got people suing the city for sexual harassment. You've got turnover. You got your city administrator who's like, "Oh, I'm out. Wait a minute. What are you doing? Why are you leaving?" You've got real turnover here at a time when you're the mayor. And I know it's a weak mayor system. I know that we can't look for her to be the answer to everything. But can you just talk a little bit? Is there some benefit to maybe her sort of talking about, hey, there's been a lot of problems and I would like to fix them, and I'm not perfect, but I do the best I can. You don't get that from Cathy. You get an A to Z list of all of her policy issues and where she stands. So can you talk a little bit, like, does that bother you at all? Or is that just a journalist thing? Like, you're worried about insider baseball, but no real person cares about all that detail?
No, I mean, I think people do care about parts of those things. I mean, certainly the stuff with city staff is very insider baseball. And I saw that as like a weird swipe in the indie piece too. But is that because of Cathy? Like, is that what people think? Or what is it that they wish would be coming out of a mayor's mouth about personnel issues at City Hall? I mean, that just seems weird. But if people want to hear that, an acknowledgement of challenges or an acknowledgement of difficulties, and it makes the explanation of what's been done more credible, I mean, that's fine. That's legitimate. That seems like reasonable, political communication strategy. It's hard for me to relate to because I don't have this sense as a citizen, as a resident of Santa Barbara, that like everything's on fire at City Hall and it's all a mess. And I just don't have that sense. I mean, I have a sense that the world is a freaking mess. And the city and county have been doing, the best they can to address it. Now, I do know, kind of more from knowing people who work in the city and so forth, that, there are a lot of structural issues going on in the city as a workplace and as an entity. So I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, I guess. Like, you probably would be good, and that would be good advice. If she's listening now, then I would put it as advice. Like, go ahead, take the bull by the horns and talk about those things, Cathy. That's great. Sure.
The other thing is vaccines. Okay. She said recently that, the labor groups don't want the vaccines. She's had to look them in the eye on the ground and hear stories about how difficult it would be for that person, for their personal reasons, to get a vaccine. So she's hesitant to require City Hall, or not. I mean, she's just the mayor, but she's hesitant to take the leadership on that, to say, hey, mandatory vaccines for all city employees. You're a science dude, right? I imagine
I'm absolutely for mandatory vaccines.
So it's stuff like that. I mean, is it reasonable to say, come on, Cathy, high school kids got to get the vaccine? I think we can make people who work for the city or members of labor groups get a vaccine. Is that not reasonable?
No, I mean, I guess so. Here's the thing: is I think that's eminently reasonable. That's politics. I support vaccine mandates. I would get up in the grill of any elected official who was being weaselly about it. We saw that it's City College, right? Yeah. Where they're let's just say registered Democrats on that board who had very bad positions on it. So it's never that I'm like, hey, vote for Cathy because she's automatically going to take the same position I do on everything. If she's being, I haven't heard what you just said. I hadn't heard yet.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard. But if she's being at all, hesitant about vaccine hesitancy, then by all means, let's push her.
But the idea is, of course, no one's perfect. She's still better than Randy Rouse, though.
Where are the other people on that issue?
Yeah. Well, Randy's, I mean, I think James has called for vaccinations for city employees, but Randy is sort of like, it's a personal freedom kind of thing, and people should.
Well, then there you go. And it's so, yeah.
I want to ask you, I don't know if you're going to comment, but Alejandro Gutierrez, Councilmember Gutierrez, endorsed by the Democratic Party, came out in Tyler Hayden's story in The Independent, basically like endorsing Nina and having some very strong negative words for Megan Harmon. I don't know if you saw that article or not, but how do you react to that as a somebody who's like helped Alejandro Gutierrez get elected, and then you see this happening playing out in public? What is your response to that?
I don't have anything. I mean, I'm just a guy now. Remember, like I'm not even on the local Democratic Central Committee right now. But it's like an issue that the elected leaders, the current leadership of the party, have to deal with when these kinds of things come out, because it is, I think, the expectation of the movement that people are going to support the other folks, that the other candidates that the party supports, for all kinds of reasons. But but let me just go back to what I was saying before. When you leave it up to politicians, and at the end of the day, even though it's a city council and it's the first thing she's ever been on, at this point, Alejandra is a politician. And when you leave it up to individual politicians to decide on who gets support and who gets endorsed, it's always like filled with subjective, interpersonal, and the personal ambitions and strategy of those individual politicians. And that's why you shouldn't listen to them. I mean, to be rude about it, but it's why, or at the very least, it's why you should take those kinds of things with a grain of salt. And look at, like, the party, the community organizations, environmental organizations, feminist organizations, labor groups, a whole range of organizations that are, when they work right, at least, are going to be making these decisions or these recommendations based purely on like moving a policy agenda. Because I didn't, that's Alejandra's critique of Megan was not particularly policy oriented.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, just in terms of the narrative, right? There's some people who say, oh, the party's too powerful. Do you think if we had a stronger Republican Party that was actually trying to groom and create new leaders that could appeal to moderates in this town, that you'd be more, or the party would be more appreciated? Because I sort of feel like the party gets a lot of criticism for being king and queen makers, right? And then if you're not part of that group, then you're sort of criticized forever as not being somebody who's
capable. So can I just say, can I just point out, I just gave 2 examples, right? I mean, I'm not arguing with you. I know that you're quoting others, but it's like, we literally just endorsed 2 candidates that have publicly, in the last 2 cycles, that have like publicly shit all over the party and run against our candidates because they were better candidates than the people. So it's just not true that the Democratic Party locally is some kind of clique, or that it's interpersonal. And in fact, and this is why I think the local media has had such trouble reporting on it, because they can't conceptualize that there could be an organization that's actually, agenda and values driven. It's got to be about Daraka's ego and this personal stuff, because it's just, that's the bias of journalism that you and I have talked about before, of like turning things into personal narratives despite the context. And so but the party really is, I mean, it's like, you can talk to other board members and you'll see that there really is a culture on the board at this point of that kind of dogged pragmatism, but also discussion among activists about like, well, but then what do we do? Like, what do we do to make sure that the candidates that we endorse follow through? Like, we need to be better about that and have a more systematic engagement with the elected officials in between elections. But to your question, I do think that some stronger, more explicitly conservative force in Santa Barbara politics would take some of that criticism and heat off. Yes. Because often what the party is up against is something more of a shibboleth, like an aw shucks apolitical kind of conservatism like Randy Rouse's, right?
Mhm.
Or an alliance that includes real arch hardcore right-wing reactionaries like Dale Francisco, but then also these like independent businessy, I wear cargo shorts, but I hate the homeless kind of folks, right? So when it was an alliance of that, it was also kind of hard to make them the foil, because we'd be like, we've got to beat these conservatives. People are like, but they're civic minded, nice people, not conservative. So it's like and conservative forces, business interests who want to keep wages low, all the people that are just have these punitive attitudes towards people experiencing homelessness, anti-immigrant groups, these kinds of forces in a place like Santa Barbara, very rarely like come out and organize in their own name. They're always like part of a larger, because it's a democratic city, so they're always smuggling their shit in, so to speak. And if it was more outright, it'd be easier for us to make a partisan case without controversy. But it's exactly in a community like this, I think, that a real organized Democratic Party that's really values driven is really important, because otherwise then you do get a kind of tyranny of supposedly moderate forces that are really aligned with powerful economic interests in the city.
All right. Well, I think we covered a lot, Daraka. I appreciate your time. I think that, I'll tell anybody who makes critical comments of you that, you can disagree with him, fine, but you're super intelligent on these issues. You put in the work, you put in the time. You grew up on the Ladera apartments, on the west side. You aren't some thinker here who decided to move into the community and tell us all what we should think and should feel. You grew up here and you have a lot of opinions and perspectives based on real life. And sure, there's always going to be people who don't like, your style and all that, but I don't think there's anyone who can say that you're not smart and informed and knowledgeable on the issues. So I always appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And of course, as you always make me a little smarter every time we talk. So I appreciate
thanks, Josh. And thanks for doing this. Thanks for doing the podcast and keeping people informed.
Yeah. Okay. Take care. Thank you.
You too.